Hi there, and welcome to Cool English. In this series, we explore the lives of amazing people and help you improve your English at the same time. Ready? Let's dive in. Mark Twain, the wit who shaped America's voice. Chapter 1. Boyhood on the Mississippi. Samuel Langhorne Clemens, better known by his pen name Mark Twain, was born on November 30th, 1835, in the small village of Florida, Missouri. He was the sixth of 7 children born to John and Jane Clemens. At the time of his birth, the United States was still a young nation, and Missouri was considered part of the wild frontier. Twain was born just 2 weeks after Halley's comet appeared in the sky, something he later claimed as a sign of his unique destiny. When Samuel was 4, his family moved to Hannibal, a growing river town on the banks of the Mississippi River. This town would become the setting for his most beloved novels, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. As a child, he spent countless hours exploring the river, watching the steamboats, and imagining adventures in the woods and caves nearby. Life in Hannibal was filled with contrast. There was joy and play, but also the harsh realities of slavery and poverty, which left a deep impression on the young boy. Twain's father was a stern and ambitious man who believed in hard work but struggled financially. He died when Samuel was only 11 years old. To support the family, Samuel left school and began working as a printer's apprentice. He quickly developed a love for language, especially witty expressions, jokes, and humorous stories, which were often shared among workers in the printing shop. During these years, Twain observed human nature closely. He saw how people behaved in times of celebration, hardship, and injustice. These early observations would later become the source of his sharp social commentary. His unique ability to see the absurdity in everyday life, even in serious matters, would become the core of his humor. The Mississippi River was more than just a background in Twain's early life. It was a living, flowing presence that shaped his imagination and identity. The river represented freedom, mystery, and danger. It carried news, people, and goods, but it also carried stories. Twain later said that his experiences on the river gave him an endless supply of material for his writing. In fact, his pen name Mark Twain came from a term used by riverboat workers to measure depth, Mark Twain meaning 2 fathoms, or safe water for boats. Though Samuel Clemens was still far from becoming Mark Twain, his early life was already rich with the themes that would later define his work. There was humor in the chaos of small-town life, sharp observation in the face of injustice, and an endless fascination with human behavior. He was not only watching the world, he was learning how to describe it with style and wit. Even in his youth, Twain began to see the deep divisions in American society. Slavery was legal in Missouri, and Samuel saw enslaved people every day. Though he accepted it as a part of life at the time, the experience stayed with him. Later in life, he would become a fierce critic of slavery and racism, using satire to expose their cruelty. His earliest heroes were not kings or generals, but mischievous boys, brave riverboat pilots, and clever storytellers. These were the kinds of characters he would later bring to life in his novels. His boyhood gave him the foundation for the humor, compassion, and courage that would define his writing, and that would help shape American literature itself. As Samuel Clemens grew older, he would leave Hannibal and explore the wider world. But the Mississippi River would always call to him, both in memory and in print. It flowed not just through his hometown, but through his imagination, and eventually through the heart of American culture. Chapter 2. Apprentice, Printer, and Dreamer. After the death of his father, Samuel Clemens was forced to grow up quickly. At just 12 years old, he left formal education behind and entered the world of work. His first job was as an apprentice in a local printing shop, where he swept floors, prepared ink, and set type by hand. Though the work was tedious, it exposed him to the power of language. Day after day, he read newspapers, articles, and books while handling printed materials. Samuel's natural curiosity and love for storytelling grew as he read everything he could get his hands on. The printing press became his classroom, and the newspaper columns his textbooks. Humor, satire, and local gossip filled the pages. He began writing small pieces himself, clever, funny sketches that showed his emerging voice. These short writings, though simple at first, already hinted at the sharp wit and playful language that would later define Mark Twain. In his late teens, Samuel left Hannibal and began traveling across the country, working for various newspapers as a typesetter and contributor. He went from St. Louis to New York, then to Philadelphia and Cincinnati. During these years, he observed a wide range of people and situations, from urban elites to working-class men, from polite society to the rough edges of frontier life. These encounters gave him a deep understanding of human nature and the absurdities of modern life. Despite limited formal schooling, Samuel became a self-taught man. He read Shakespeare, history, science, and political commentary. More importantly, he listened to stories in saloons, gossip in train stations, arguments in boarding houses. This habit of listening and watching would become one of his greatest strengths as a writer. He was less interested in grand heroes and more fascinated by everyday people, their dreams, lies, pride, and humor. One of his early dreams was to become a riverboat pilot. For young men in the Mississippi region, this was a glamorous job. Pilots were seen as knowledgeable, adventurous, and free. After saving money and studying hard, Samuel began training as a steamboat pilot in his early 20s. He learned to read the river's moods, its hidden sandbars, shifting currents, and changing depths. It was during this time that he adopted the pen name Mark Twain, a term used by pilots to indicate water that was 2 fathoms deep, safe for passage. Being a pilot brought Samuel not only status but also inspiration. The river taught him patience and precision. It also exposed him to a wide range of passengers, gamblers, merchants, slaves, preachers, and pioneers. Each journey was filled with new characters and fresh material. Twain later wrote, "I used to take great pride in being a pilot. The pilot, even in those days, was the only unfettered and entirely independent human being that lived on the earth." Twain's writing during this period was still informal, mostly letters and humorous travel pieces for newspapers, but his style was becoming recognizable. He wrote in plain language, avoided grand phrases, and focused on clear, honest storytelling. His humor was rooted in reality, often poking fun at human weakness, foolish pride, or political hypocrisy. He made readers laugh, but also made them think. Then, in 1861, everything changed. The American Civil War broke out, and steamboat travel came to a near stop. Samuel's career as a riverboat pilot ended abruptly. Looking for new opportunities, he joined a small group of volunteers from Missouri to fight for the Confederacy. However, his service was short-lived, only 2 weeks. He later joked that he left because the first time I heard a gun, I retired from military life. Disillusioned by war and eager to escape, Twain followed his older brother Orion to the Nevada Territory, where Orion had been appointed Secretary of the new territory. This move marked the beginning of a new chapter, the Wild West. The long journey westward was filled with danger and discovery, rattlesnakes, bandits, strange towns, and unforgettable stories. Twain began documenting his travels in newspaper columns, and readers loved his dry wit and sharp observations. His pen was becoming mightier, and his voice was becoming stronger. In this period of wandering, Twain sharpened his view of the world. He saw greed in gold-rush towns, foolishness in politics, and kindness among strangers. He also began to question the American dream, noticing how often it favored the lucky or the dishonest. These insights, mixed with his humor and storytelling, began forming the foundation of his literary legacy. Though he still had no published books, Samuel Clemens was slowly transforming into Mark Twain, the humorist, the traveler, the critic, the dreamer. He had yet to find his greatest stories, but already he was learning how to tell them better than anyone else. Chapter 3. Roughing It. Mining Towns and the Making of a Humorist. In 1861, Samuel Clemens followed his brother Orion to the Nevada Territory, a land of dusty roads, endless deserts, and high hopes. The American West was a place where fortunes were made or lost in a single day. Gold and silver fever ran hot, and towns sprang up almost overnight. Samuel entered this wild environment not as a writer, but as a young man seeking adventure and possibly a quick fortune. At first, he tried his hand at mining. Like many others, he dreamed of striking it rich in the Comstock Lode, one of the largest silver deposits in American history. But reality quickly crushed those dreams. Mining was dirty, dangerous, and disappointing. Twain later wrote that his time as a miner was mostly spent washing dirt and hoping for a miracle. It was during these difficult months that Twain discovered something far more valuable than silver: his voice as a humorist. He began writing witty letters about frontier life and sending them to newspapers in Virginia City, Nevada. The local paper, the Territorial Enterprise, soon offered him a full-time job. There, he became a reporter, editor, and writer of humorous columns. The Territorial Enterprise was no ordinary newspaper. It thrived on exaggeration, tall tales, and biting social commentary. Twain learned to write quickly and sharply, often turning strange local events into hilarious stories. He wrote about bar fights, political scandals, weather extremes, and the ridiculous behavior of miners, gamblers, and preachers. His style was bold and playful, mixing fact with fiction in a way that kept readers entertained and sometimes fooled. It was here that Samuel Clemens first signed his work Mark Twain. The name was originally a riverboat term, but in the Wild West it took on new meaning. It became the name of a man who could observe madness and describe it with perfect comic timing. The name stuck, and the legend began. Twain's humor was never just for laughs. Beneath the jokes, he offered serious critiques of greed, corruption, and human foolishness. He saw how people were blinded by dreams of wealth and how they often lost their morals chasing success. In one column, he described a conman selling fake mining claims to desperate prospectors. In another, he mocked local politicians who promised everything but delivered nothing. His pen was both sword and mirror. The West shaped Twain's character as much as it shaped his writing. He developed a strong dislike for hypocrisy and injustice. He learned to question authority and to challenge popular opinion. These values would become central to his later novels. In 1864, Twain moved to San Francisco, where he joined a lively group of writers, artists, and thinkers. The city was filled with strange contrasts: wealth and poverty, refinement and wildness. He worked for several newspapers and continued to refine his style. He wrote about everything from police corruption to the behavior of stray dogs, always with a sharp eye and a sharper wit. San Francisco also introduced Twain to a new kind of writing: lectures. He began giving public readings of his stories, entertaining crowds with his voice and timing. He quickly became a popular performer, praised for his storytelling charm and humor. Speaking in front of audiences helped him understand how people responded to rhythm, timing, and punchlines, skills he would later use to great effect in his books. One of his most famous stories from this period was the celebrated Jumping Frog of Calaveras County. It was based on a tale he heard in a gold rush town and published in 1865. The story featured a slow-talking narrator and a frog that had supposedly been trained to jump farther than any other. The piece became a national sensation and marked Twain's breakthrough. He was no longer just a local journalist. He was now a recognized American humorist. The success of the Jumping Frog story brought Twain national attention. Publishers, editors, and readers wanted more. He traveled to New York and began working with larger newspapers and literary magazines. But he never forgot the lessons of the West: to see through nonsense, to laugh at false promises, and to always look for the truth beneath the glitter. Twain later collected his experiences in a semi-autobiographical travel book called Roughing It, 1872. The book was both a humorous memoir and a critical look at American dreams. He told of failed mining attempts, bizarre characters, and dangerous adventures, all with his usual wit and honesty. The book became a bestseller and confirmed his status as a major American voice. His time in the West didn't make him rich with gold or silver, but it gave him something far more lasting material. Twain had found his themes: the madness of money, the comedy of ambition, The Tragedy of Self-Deception. He had also found his method, humor, as a tool to reveal uncomfortable truths. By the end of his years out west, Mark Twain was no longer searching for his identity. He had forged it with ink, laughter, and sharp observation. The journey that began as a failed mining adventure had turned him into a national figure, and the stage was now set for his next great leap, the journey overseas. Chapter 4. The Innocents Abroad. Twain Takes on the World. By the late 1860s, Mark Twain had established himself as a rising star in American journalism and humor, but he was restless. He had roamed the Mississippi, the mining towns of Nevada, and the foggy streets of San Francisco. Now, he wanted to see the world beyond America. When the chance came to join a pleasure cruise to Europe and the Holy Land, Twain didn't hesitate. This journey would change his life and his career forever. In 1867, Twain joined a group of mostly wealthy Americans on a 5-month tour aboard the Quaker City, one of the first organized international leisure cruises. The itinerary was ambitious. They would visit France, Italy, Greece, Turkey, and Palestine. Twain was there not only as a tourist but also as a correspondent for the Alta California newspaper. His letters from abroad were eagerly read by Americans curious about distant lands. But Twain was no ordinary travel writer. He didn't write romantic descriptions or polite praise. Instead, he brought his signature humor and skepticism to every stop. In Paris, he mocked the showy manners of the upper class. In Rome, he expressed boredom at endless piles of old stones. In the Holy Land, he was irreverent but thoughtful, often questioning religious customs and the idea of sacred sites. He compared ancient ruins to collapsed barns and complained about the heat, bad food, and aggressive tour guides. Twain's travel writing was refreshingly honest and hilariously funny. He made no effort to appear cultured or overly respectful. Instead, he offered the raw experience of a curious, often unimpressed American seeing Europe for the first time. Readers loved it. His humor came not just from jokes, but from the sharp contrast between expectation and reality. One famous example was his visit to the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Twain joked, "I suppose it is very well, but I would rather see it straight." He turned sacred cows into punchlines and historical sites into settings for absurd encounters. Yet behind the jokes was a deeper point. Americans were not necessarily inferior to Europeans, despite the old world sense of superiority. In 1869, Twain collected his letters and turned them into a book titled The Innocents Abroad. It was a surprising success, one of the best-selling travel books of the 19th century. The title itself was ironic. The innocents were wealthy American tourists who often behaved with arrogance, ignorance, or naivety. Twain used them and himself as comic examples of how little people truly understood the cultures they visited. But The Innocents Abroad wasn't just comedy. Twain used the book to challenge assumptions. He questioned the idea that Europe was the height of civilization, that religion made places sacred, or that travelers automatically gained wisdom by seeing old things. He showed how tourism could become a performance, where people pretended to be impressed because they were supposed to be. Twain's observations struck a chord. Americans were beginning to develop their own cultural identity, separate from Europe. Twain's humor gave them permission to laugh at old-world traditions, to feel proud of their rougher but more democratic ways. In this sense, the book was not only entertaining, but also political. It helped shape an emerging American voice that was confident, independent, and unafraid of mockery. Twain's success with The Innocents Abroad made him a national celebrity. He began a lecture tour to promote the book, speaking in packed theaters across the country. His talks were as witty and sharp as his writing, filled with stories from his travels, jokes about foreign customs, and reflections on American society. Audiences were thrilled to meet the man behind the laughter. Yet, even as Twain joked about Europe, he remained deeply thoughtful. Travel had expanded his view of the world. He had seen poverty and beauty, ignorance and wisdom in both Europe and America. He understood that all people, no matter where they lived, shared the same mix of dreams and disappointments. His humor allowed him to criticize without cruelty, and to connect with readers from many walks of life. The book also marked Twain's transition from newspaper writer to professional author. With its success, he could now live by his pen. He settled in Buffalo, New York, and married Olivia Langdon, a well-educated and thoughtful woman from a wealthy family. Their marriage would bring both joy and challenge, and Olivia would become one of Twain's most important editors and supporters. By the end of the 1860s, Mark Twain had gone from a young man chasing gold in Nevada to a respected national figure with a best-selling book and a growing reputation. But he wasn't done exploring. More travels, more books, and even greater fame awaited him. The journey from the Mississippi to the Mediterranean had done more than entertain, it had revealed. Twain's great gift, the ability to look at the world with both wonder and disbelief, to admire and criticize at once, and to find laughter in the most unexpected places. Chapter 5. A Literary Legacy Begins. Tom Sawyer, Huck Finn, and Life at Home. By the early 1870s, Mark Twain had achieved national recognition. The Innocents Abroad had made him a best-selling author, and his lecture tours drew packed audiences across the country. But a new chapter in his life was just beginning, one that would shape his most enduring literary contributions and his identity as a family man. In 1870, Twain married Olivia Langdon, a woman of refinement, strong intellect, and deep moral values. Olivia came from a wealthy, influential family in Elmira, New York. At first, Twain worried he might not fit into such a cultured household. After all, he was a man of the frontier, with a background in mining camps and riverboats. But Olivia saw past that. She believed in his talent and vision. Their marriage brought a new kind of stability to Twain's life. They moved to Buffalo, and later to Hartford, Connecticut, where they built a grand home. This house, filled with creativity and love, became the center of Twain's most productive years. Olivia supported him in every way, editing his drafts, offering feedback, and managing household affairs so he could focus on writing. During this time, Twain wrote Roughing It, 1872, a humorous memoir of his adventures in the American West. But his most famous works were still ahead of him. In 1876, he published The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, a nostalgic yet realistic portrait of boyhood along the Mississippi River. The book introduced readers to Tom, a mischievous, clever, and brave boy who avoided school, explored caves, and whitewashed fences in clever ways. Tom Sawyer was more than a children's book. It reflected Twain's sharp eye for human nature and his ability to blend humor with subtle social critique. Through Tom's adventures, Twain gently exposed adult hypocrisy, narrow-mindedness, and injustice, all under the mask of innocent fun. 2 years later, Twain began work on what would become his masterpiece, Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Published in 1885, the novel pushed American literature into new territory. Huck Finn was not a typical hero. He was poor, uneducated, and lived on the margins of society. Yet, through his eyes, Twain revealed the deep racial injustice and moral confusion of pre-Civil War America. One of the central relationships in Huckleberry Finn is between Huck and Jim, an escaped enslaved man. Their journey down the Mississippi River is both physical and symbolic. On the surface, it's an adventure story filled with humor, danger, and vivid characters. Beneath that, it's a profound examination of freedom, identity, and the struggle between conscience and societal values. At one point, Huck must decide whether to turn Jim in to the authorities or help him escape. Society had taught Huck that helping an enslaved man was wrong, but his personal experience with Jim, the kindness, the shared hardship, the friendship, told him otherwise. Huck finally says, "All right, then I'll go to hell," a line that captures one of the greatest moral declarations in American literature. Twain's use of dialect, humor, and realism in Huckleberry Finn was groundbreaking. He didn't try to polish or romanticize the American South. He showed it in all its complexity, its beauty, its cruelty, its contradictions. While the novel was controversial for its use of racial language, It remains one of the most powerful indictments of slavery and racism in American fiction. During these years, Twain balanced intense writing with family life. He and Olivia had 4 children, though only 3 survived infancy. Twain was a devoted father. He played games, told bedtime stories, and wrote delightful letters to his children when he was away. His home life softened some of his sharper edges, and his family gave him a sense of emotional grounding. Yet, Twain's personal views were evolving. Having seen the horrors of slavery, the hypocrisy of religious leaders, and the greed of politicians, he became more critical of American society. He began to see humor as a way not just to entertain, but to expose injustice and absurdity. His speeches during this period often mixed comedy with sharp criticism. In one talk, he joked that Congress was America's only native criminal class. In another, he mocked religious leaders who preached virtue while living in luxury. He used satire to hold a mirror up to the powerful, exposing their flaws without preaching. Twain's fame continued to grow, but so did the pressures. Writing was never easy for him. He often struggled with deadlines, perfectionism, and self-doubt. Despite his humorous public image, Twain was a deeply thoughtful and sometimes melancholic man. The more he understood the world, the more he saw its failings, and the more he felt driven to speak the truth, no matter how uncomfortable. By the end of the 1880s, Mark Twain was more than a writer. He was a cultural force. His books were read across the United States and Europe. His lectures filled theaters. His voice was trusted, feared, and admired, but his journey was far from over. Ahead lay financial disasters, global travels, personal loss, and some of the most profound writing of his life. Chapter 6: Trouble and Travels, Debt, Global Journeys, and a Shifting Worldview. As the 1890s approached, Mark Twain found himself at the height of his fame but facing some of the most difficult years of his life. Though his books continued to sell and his lectures remained popular, his financial decisions, guided more by optimism than caution, would soon cause great distress. Twain was not only a writer, he also saw himself as an inventor and businessman. Over the years, he invested heavily in a variety of projects, including a typesetting machine called the Page Compositor. Twain believed it would revolutionize the printing industry. He poured nearly all his savings into it, convinced that it would make him richer than his books ever could. Unfortunately, the machine was a failure. It was complex, unreliable, and soon made obsolete by newer technology. Twain also founded his own publishing company, Charles L. Webster & Co., which published the memoirs of Ulysses S. Grant. While Grant's memoirs were a huge success, other ventures of the company lost money. The final blow came when the company declared bankruptcy in 1894. At age 59, Twain found himself nearly penniless. Many others would have declared personal bankruptcy and walked away, but Twain refused. He saw debt not only as a financial burden, but as a moral one. He made a bold decision. He would earn back every dollar he owed. To do this, Twain began a worldwide lecture tour. Starting in 1895, he traveled across the United States, then to Canada, and later around the globe. He gave speeches in Australia, India, South Africa, and various parts of Asia and Europe. Everywhere he went, audiences flocked to hear him speak. They came not only for the humor, but also for the insight and honesty he brought. These travels gave Twain a new lens through which to view the world. In India, he saw the impact of British colonialism and was deeply disturbed. He was appalled by the inequality, the poverty, and the arrogance of imperial rule. He began to question more deeply the role of power, race, and economics in shaping societies. In South Africa, he encountered similar injustices under British rule. While he still used humor in his lectures and writings, it had begun to take on a sharper, more bitter tone. Twain was no longer content just to poke fun at human foolishness. He now aimed to expose cruelty and corruption at every level. He documented much of this in Following the Equator 1897, a travelogue that mixed humorous observations with serious reflections on empire, race, and ethics. One of his most powerful quotes from this period reads, "There are many humorous things in the world, among them the white man's notion that he is less savage than the other savages." The book revealed a Twain more cynical, more worldly, and more willing to challenge his readers' assumptions. His sense of justice had always been strong, but now it was global. He began to see the human experience as a shared struggle, one where laughter could be used not just for fun, but for truth. Despite the physical exhaustion of travel and the emotional toll of his losses, Twain's tour was a success. By 1898, he had repaid all his debts in full. This achievement restored his honor and won him deep admiration, even among his critics. Twain's personal life during this period was also filled with change. While on tour, he suffered the loss of his beloved daughter Susie, who died of meningitis at age 24. The news reached him while he was abroad, and he was devastated. Twain never fully recovered from her death. His writings became more somber, his humor darker, and his sense of life's tragedy more pronounced. Back in the United States, Twain was celebrated not just as an author, but as a living symbol of American wit and resilience. He began to wear his famous white suit, which he adopted as a kind of personal uniform. It gave him a grandfatherly appearance that matched his role as the nation's moral commentator. He continued to write, though less frequently than before. His essays became more political, and his fiction more experimental. Twain's worldview had expanded, but so had his sorrow. The losses, the travels, and the aging process had made him more introspective. Still, he never lost the core of who he was, a man who could find humor in hardship, who used satire to challenge authority, and who believed in the dignity of the common person. Even as the world grew darker in his eyes, he continued to shine light through his words. As the century neared its end, Twain stood as both a witness to and a critic of modern progress. He had seen slavery and freedom, war and peace, invention and failure, poverty and wealth. He had journeyed from the muddy banks of the Mississippi to the palaces of Europe and the temples of India. And through it all, he kept asking questions, probing, laughing, challenging. Chapter 7. The Sage in White, Late Writings, and the Deepening of Twain's Critique. By the turn of the 20th century, Mark Twain had become more than an American author. He was a living legend. His white suit, wild hair, and sharp tongue were instantly recognizable. Journalists, politicians, and the public all wanted to hear what he had to say. But behind the fame was a man growing increasingly skeptical of the world around him. Twain's late writings took on darker tones. His humor remained, but it was now wrapped in bitterness, irony, and philosophical depth. He had witnessed too much: slavery, war, colonialism, and personal loss, to maintain a purely light-hearted view of life. Religion, once a source of comfort, became one of his major targets. Twain had always questioned organized religion's claims to moral authority, but now his criticism became bolder and more direct. In works such as Letters from the Earth, written in the early 1900s but published posthumously, Twain imagined Satan writing letters to heaven, describing the strange and often cruel behaviors of humans, especially their religious beliefs. Through satire, Twain exposed what he saw as the absurdity of many theological doctrines. Why would a loving God create suffering? Why would religious institutions preach compassion while tolerating war, racism, and greed? Twain's questions were not meant to mock belief itself, but rather to challenge blind faith and hypocrisy. He once wrote, "Faith is believing what you know ain't so." His critiques weren't limited to religion. Twain became increasingly vocal about politics and the role of America on the world stage. He openly criticized the Spanish-American War and the U.S. annexation of the Philippines. He was horrified by American soldiers' actions abroad and the government's imperialist ambitions. In 1901, Twain joined the Anti-Imperialist League and began writing essays condemning colonial violence. His essay To the Person Sitting in Darkness exposed the gap between America's ideals and its actions. He accused the US government of exploiting weaker nations under the guise of spreading civilization and democracy. In his view, imperialism was not a noble mission. It was robbery disguised as righteousness. Though these views shocked some of his readers, many admired Twain's courage. He was one of the few public figures willing to speak openly against national policy. He refused to stay silent when he believed moral truths were at stake. At the same time, Twain began to explore deeper philosophical questions about human nature. He worked on texts like What is Man?, in which he suggested that humans were essentially products of heredity and environment, rather than free-willed moral agents. It was a controversial view, one that placed him in opposition to traditional moral and religious thinking. In these essays and dialogues, Twain argued that people often act from selfish motives, even when doing good, and that society shapes behavior more than reason or conscience. This deterministic view was unsettling to many, but it reflected Twain's lifelong struggle to understand why people do harm even when they know better. Still, Twain's late writings weren't only grim. There were moments of beauty, affection, and gentle irony. He continued to write charming stories like A Dog's Tale and Eve's Diary, where he used animals and biblical figures to express kindness, innocence, and love. Even in his most skeptical works, there was a deep humanity, a concern for the suffering of others, and a longing for justice. Personally, Twain's life remained marked by tragedy. In 1904, his beloved wife Olivia died after years of illness. Twain was heartbroken. They had shared a strong partnership, and her death left him feeling empty and alone. He also experienced the deaths of two of his daughters, further deepening his grief. These losses isolated him. He spent much of his later years living in hotels or renting houses, often in solitude. Yet, he maintained a sharp interest in public affairs. His home might have grown quiet, but his voice in society remained loud. Twain's correspondence from these years reveals a man who was both world-weary and intellectually alive. He still wrote witty letters, still engaged in lively conversations, still gave interviews filled with clever remarks. When asked late in life if he feared death, he replied, "I was dead for billions of years before I was born and never suffered the slightest inconvenience." In 1907, Twain received an honorary doctorate from Oxford University, one of the most prestigious academic honors in the world. Dressed in formal robes and his trademark white suit underneath, he delivered a speech filled with humor and gratitude. The boy from Missouri, once a printer's apprentice and riverboat pilot, had become one of the most celebrated writers in the English-speaking world. But Twain didn't see himself as a great man. He once said, "I am not an American. I am the American." By this he meant he embodied not only the country's virtues, humor, courage, independence, but also its flaws, contradiction, doubt, and restlessness. As he aged, Twain continued to explore new ideas and write drafts of works he never finished. He remained curious about science, psychology, politics, and ethics. Though his later writings were not as commercially successful as Tom Sawyer or Huckleberry Finn, they offered a deeper look into the mind of a man who refused to stop questioning. Twain's twilight years reveal a writer who had grown far beyond storytelling. He had become a thinker, a critic, and a conscience. His words carried weight not just because they entertained, but because they challenged readers to think for themselves. In his own words, the truth has no defense against a fool determined to believe a lie. And Twain, ever the truth-teller, remained determined to confront lies wherever he found them, even within himself. Chapter 8. Twilight Years, Solitude, Sorrow, and the Final Laugh. As the new century unfolded, Mark Twain moved through his final years with a mixture of fading light and flickering brilliance. His family was mostly gone. His wife, Olivia, had died in 1904. His daughter Susie had died in 1896, and his daughter Jean, who struggled with epilepsy, would pass away in 1909, just months before Twain's own death. Only Clara, his middle daughter, remained by his side. These personal tragedies left Twain increasingly alone, but not silent. In the midst of grief, his wit never fully left him. He once remarked, "I've had a lot of worries in my life, most of which never happened." It was the kind of line only Twain could deliver. Funny, reflexive, and tinged with the wisdom of sorrow. In his final years, Twain lived much of the time at Stormfield, his villa in Redding, Connecticut. Though beautiful and peaceful, the house often felt empty. Twain filled it with guests when he could, including close friends and admirers who wanted to spend time with the famous author. He still enjoyed clever conversation and was always ready with a sarcastic quip or a charming story. Twain's public image remained strong. He was frequently invited to speak at events, comment on political issues, and lend his name to causes. Newspapers quoted him regularly, and fans from around the world sent letters and gifts. He still represented the voice of American common sense, sharp, skeptical, and funny. Yet privately, Twain was more complex. His writings from this period, including unpublished manuscripts, notebooks, and essays, reveal a mind wrestling with mortality. Death had become familiar to him, not just as a concept, but as a companion. In letters to friends, he often joked about dying, but beneath the humor was a kind of weary acceptance. He also grew increasingly interested in science and the afterlife. He read widely about astronomy and psychology, and even explored the idea of reincarnation, but he remained an agnostic, uncertain of any religious doctrine. When asked about heaven, he would say something like, "I'll go to heaven for the climate and hell for the company." Twain was also deeply aware of his legacy. He began to organize his papers and authorized Albert Bigelow Paine to write his official biography. He left instructions for certain works to be published only after his death, particularly those containing controversial views about religion, politics, and humanity. He wanted to speak the truth, but he also knew the world might not be ready to hear it. One of his most touching late pieces was Eve's Diary, a short work written after Olivia's death. In it, Twain imagines Eve reflecting on her life with Adam. The story is gentle and filled with love, ending with Eve's words, "Wherever she was, there was Eden." It was Twain's tribute to his wife, a rare moment of unguarded tenderness from a man usually armored in irony. In 1909, Twain wrote, "I came in with Halley's Comet in 1835. It is coming again next year, and I expect to go out with it." He did. On April 21, 1910, just one day after the comet made its closest approach to Earth, Samuel Langhorne Clemens, known to the world as Mark Twain, died at age 74. His death was mourned not only in America, but around the globe. Newspapers carried headlines like "The World Mourns Mark Twain." Presidents, authors, and ordinary citizens all paid tribute to a man who had made them laugh, think, and question. Though he died in 1910, Twain's words never left us. His books have been translated into dozens of languages. His characters remain part of the global imagination, and his ideas about race, power, justice, and freedom continue to challenge readers over a century later. Twain's legacy is rich and layered. He was a humorist, yes, but also a fierce critic of injustice. He was a master storyteller, yet also a deep philosopher. He embraced the contradictions of being human, kind and angry, hopeful and bitter, wise and foolish. Perhaps that's why he continues to resonate with readers of all ages and backgrounds. In Twain's world, truth is often funny, laughter can be brave, and a boy on a raft can become a symbol of conscience for an entire nation. And maybe most of all, Mark Twain taught us that words matter, that they can entertain, expose, and endure. He once said, "The difference between the almost right word and the right word is really a large matter. It's the difference between the lightning bug and the lightning." In his hands, the lightning struck often, and it still does. Chapter 9. Echoes Across Time. Twain's Enduring Literary Legacy. Mark Twain's influence on American literature is both vast and deeply rooted. More than a storyteller, he was a cultural architect, reshaping how Americans and the world understood their language, identity, and moral conflicts. His most famous works remain widely read and studied not only for their humor and narrative power, but for their insight into human behavior and society. Among Twain's greatest contributions was his mastery of colloquial language, everyday speech that reflected the true voices of American people. Before Twain, many American authors still wrote in the refined style of European literature. Twain, however, believed that literature should reflect the real rhythms of life along the Mississippi River, in small towns, on front porches, and in bustling cities. His masterpiece, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, 1884, is often cited as the first truly American novel. Ernest Hemingway famously declared, "All modern American literature comes from one book by Mark Twain called Huckleberry Finn." Twain's use of regional dialects, his unfiltered social commentary, and the moral complexity of his characters made the novel revolutionary. In the book, young Huck's decision to help the runaway slave Jim, even when he believes it will damn him to hell, is one of the most powerful moments in American literature. Twain wasn't just telling a story about a boy and a raft, he was confronting the moral failures of a nation built on slavery and racism. Huck's internal conflict reflected the broader crisis of conscience in post-Civil War America. Yet Huckleberry Finn is also controversial. Over the years, critics have debated its use of racial language and stereotypes. Twain was a product of his time, but also a critic of it. While some see the novel as anti-racist, others worry that its language and portrayal of characters like Jim reinforce harmful images. Despite the debate, the book remains central in discussions of race, literature, and education in the United States. Another widely beloved work, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, 1876, is often seen as a lighter companion to Huckleberry Finn, through Tom's mischievous adventures, faking his own death, running away to become a pirate, tricking others into painting a fence. Twain captures the imagination and restlessness of youth. Yet even in its light-hearted tone, the novel reveals social tensions and explores how children learn to navigate an adult world filled with rules and expectations. Twain also wrote works with strong historical, political, and social themes. A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, 1889, is a time travel novel with sharp commentary on technology, monarchy, and social progress. It shows how introducing modern ideas to an ancient society can bring unintended consequences, a warning against both blind tradition and blind faith in progress. His short stories and essays also had powerful effects. In The War Prayer, Twain portrays a church congregation asking God to grant them victory in war, only to be reminded by a mysterious stranger that to pray for victory is also to pray for the suffering and death of others. The piece was so bold in its anti-war message that it was not published during his lifetime. Twain's reach extended beyond literature. His speeches, letters, and public persona helped shape national discussions on politics, religion, and ethics. He was more than an author. He was a public intellectual, a kind of philosopher in a white suit, speaking truth to power with humor as his sword. Internationally, Twain was also highly influential. His books were translated into many languages, and his tours across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia helped build bridges between cultures. He offered American readers glimpses into other lands and peoples, and he helped shape the global image of the American writer as bold, witty, and unafraid to question authority. But Twain's legacy isn't just about the themes he explored or the boundaries he broke. It's also about the joy he brought to reading. His wit, timing, and love of storytelling made literature accessible and entertaining. Even when his subjects were serious, racism, war, hypocrisy, he never lost his ability to make people laugh. That blend of humor and truth is what sets him apart. Twain also helped to legitimize American regional voices. Writers from the South, Midwest, and West found in him a model for writing about their own worlds in their own words. He proved that American life, in all its strange and ordinary beauty, was worthy of great literature. Moreover, Twain opened the door for writers to be both entertainers and critics, to be playful with language while remaining serious in purpose. From Kurt Vonnegut to Toni Morrison, from John Steinbeck to Maya Angelou, many writers have drawn inspiration from his fearless blending of fiction and reality. And let's not forget Twain's deep belief in the power of storytelling as a way to teach, heal, and provoke thought. He once said, "The man who does not read has no advantage over the man who cannot read." For Twain, stories were not just fun, they were essential tools of learning, windows into the soul of a society. In classrooms, on stages, in libraries, and on screens, Twain's work continues to thrive. Modern adaptations of Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn appear in films, television, theater, and even comic books. His quotes circulate widely on social media. His voice, in many ways, is still with us. Perhaps his greatest legacy is the challenge he gave to future generations to speak honestly, think critically, and write with courage. Twain understood that language shapes thought, and that the right words, delivered with wit and heart, could shift minds and even societies. As we look toward the final chapter, we will consider how Twain's life, works, and philosophy have continued to influence not only writers and thinkers, but also how we define American identity itself. Chapter 10. A Voice That Endures. Mark Twain in the Modern Imagination. More than a century after his death, Mark Twain remains a living presence in American culture, and far beyond it. His image is instantly recognizable: the bushy white mustache, the wild hair, the white suit, and the half-smile that seems to know more than it's saying. But it's not only his face that persists, it's his voice, ideas, and spirit that continue to echo in modern times. Twain's works are part of the foundation of modern American education. Students encounter the adventures of Tom Sawyer and the adventures of Huckleberry Finn early in their schooling. These books introduce them not only to Twain's humor, but also to deep questions about morality, freedom, race, and growing up. Through Huck's eyes, students explore injustice and conscience. Through Tom's mischief, they glimpse youthful energy and rebellion. Yet Twain's influence is not limited to the classroom. His sharp observations on politics, religion, and human nature remain uncannily relevant. In an age of fake news, social media outrage, and political spin, Twain's words strike a timeless chord. He once said, "A lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is putting on its shoes." That statement could easily be tweeted today and go viral, its truth undiminished. Modern thinkers, comedians, and writers still cite Twain as a role model. His wit paved the way for satirists like Jon Stewart, Stephen Colbert, and George Carlin, who use humor to expose hypocrisy and provoke thought. His fearless truth-telling inspires writers who dare to challenge social norms, whether they're writing novels, blogs, or screenplays. Twain also lives on in popular culture. His life has been turned into plays, movies, TV shows, and documentaries. From animated versions of his stories to serious biographical films, Twain remains a compelling character. He appears as a time traveler, a ghost, or even a character in science fiction. These portrayals reflect a deep cultural desire to keep his voice active in new conversations. His birthplace in Florida, Missouri, and his boyhood home in Hannibal are now museums visited by thousands each year. The Mark Twain House and Museum in Hartford, Connecticut, where he wrote some of his best-known works, serves as both a literary landmark and a cultural center. People visit not just to learn about Twain, but to connect with the America he captured, its dreams, contradictions, and soul. In academic circles, Twain is studied as a literary innovator, a moral philosopher, and a political commentator. Scholars analyze the structure of his novels, the symbolism in his characters, and the philosophical undertones of his humor. He's read not just for entertainment, but for insight into how a nation sees itself and changes over time. For English learners and readers around the world, Twain opens a door to American thought and culture. His storytelling makes the language vivid and real, and his themes are universal: freedom, injustice, identity, love, and courage. Twain's ability to write in the voice of ordinary people helps language learners hear English as it's actually spoken, with rhythm, slang, and emotion. Twain also remains a powerful symbol of independent thinking. He distrusted authority, questioned tradition, and mocked pretension. He once wrote, "Whenever you find yourself on the side of the majority, it is time to pause and reflect." That spirit of questioning, of refusing to accept things at face value, is as important today as it was in Twain's time. He even foresaw the strange contradictions of modern life. In The Mysterious Stranger, Twain wrote about illusion and reality, challenging readers to think deeply about existence. His later writings reveal a man who saw the potential and peril in technology, the limits of progress, and the complexity of human nature. Twain's legacy also lives through the values he championed: empathy, honesty, justice, and laughter. He didn't preach these values, he dramatized them. Through stories and characters, he helped readers feel what others feel, see injustice clearly, and laugh even when the truth was hard. In today's world, where many voices compete for attention, Twain's voice still cuts through the noise. His humor reminds us not to take ourselves too seriously. His critiques push us to think harder about our beliefs. His stories give us both escape and reflection. Above all, Twain reminds us of the power of storytelling. A story, well told, can change a mind, open a heart, and move a nation. Twain's stories did that, and still do. As we close this biography, we return to the river, the mighty Mississippi, that shaped his boyhood and became a symbol in his work. Twain said, "The river has a new story every day." So did he, and so can we. Whether you are a student, a traveler, a writer, or a dreamer, Twain invites you to see the world with a sharper eye, a lighter heart, and a braver soul. His voice, humorous and haunting, remains a guiding light for those who seek to understand both America and humanity. Mark Twain is not just a figure of the past. He is a voice of the present and a companion for the future. Thanks for learning with Ku English. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Until next time.